Welcome to the BetterU Podcast, where we go in depth and get to listen to stories of hope, strength, and courage straight from some of the leading health, fitness, and wellness experts who help transform lives one person at a time. I'm your host, RKaye, and today we are joined by planning mavens and Beyond Your Wildest Dreams creators, Alegre Ramos and Natascha Corrigan. So good morning, ladies. How are you guys today?
Good morning.
Great. What a nice intro.
Thank you so much. All right. So, well, as I mentioned, I regularly talk about, industry experts and how everyone has been able to help other people out through their own stories. So speaking of your own stories, I'd like for you to explain to our audience, how was it that you came about Beyond Your Wildest Dreams and helping other women, especially mothers out there, with their own self-care, planning, all of that good stuff. Can you explain more about that to us?
Yes. Well, I'm freshly washed, as you can see. So this is Allegra. And so the way my story goes is that, as a woman of color, as someone who, I got my MBA, and when I was in MBA school, the ratio of women to men was 1 woman for every 11 guys, right? So I was used to not making up a big part of the population, and yet I never felt disenfranchised until I became a mom. And it seemed like I was losing myself, and it's so, everyone's at different stages of life. And let me tell you, if you're not a mom yet, perfect, you should be listening, because be prepared, right?
Yeah.
And it's just so easy because you're just so focused on keeping another person alive, right? Like if you've ever rescued a squirrel that fell out of its nest, or a bird that fell out of its nest, like imagine that, but for 365 days, 24/7, right? And It's funny because literally on our daughter's first birthday, my husband and I looked at each other and we spontaneously high-fived and both said, "She's alive." and neither of us knew that we were carrying that stress, but we were. It is so difficult. And the thing is that it's so challenging for so long, because the first 5 years, it gets easier every year, but the first 5 years are intense. But 5 years is long enough that you can forget how you did things before and what it was like to only focus on yourself. And so, becoming a mom, I realized okay, wait, I'm not okay with losing myself in being in motherhood, right? I'm not okay with that. And I had always had other businesses, but actually I had closed a business when my daughter was 2. So at that point, I wasn't super active with my new business. I was teaching cooking classes, and I had planned to write a cookbook, but I wasn't loving it. And I also was feeling like my personal relationships and my personal relationship with myself and my health were not doing so great. So I said to my husband, I was like, I need a few days away. I just need to think. And I took 3 days in a monastery, and I really wanted to figure out why I was having success in some areas, but not others, right? And the areas I was having success were the business and the finance. And what I realized was that the difference was planning, right? In business and in finance, I had been used to having budgets and tracking things and measuring. But in my personal life, if my husband and I went without a date for months, I didn't take note of that, right? If I didn't talk to my cousins in Washington for months, I didn't track that. I didn't track how much I exercised. And so as soon as I started applying those kind of project management skills to my personal life, I really saw a lot of success. And then I'll let Natascha tell her story, because that gets into how we started BYWD.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a different story than Allegra. I was never in the, in the business world. I was an entrepreneur. I started my business well before my first son showed up. Had to take some time off when he showed up. But I was essentially, a work at home, stay at home mom. And I felt like this, I was churning along in the business, doing okay, keeping my kids alive, right? And I was like this. I was like, okay, I'm here, and I'm able to manage, right? But get to the end of the day just exhausted, put the kids to bed, and then go okay, I gotta get that monthly report in, or whatever, that kind of thing. And just really feeling like I'd have this idea for another business, or even if it isn't something entrepreneurial or something, that would bring in money per se, just this, like, I love DIY. Like I wanted to like repaint the bedroom or whatever, like little different projects that I just felt like I couldn't move forward on those things because I was here, and so,
and you're tall. So here is high.
I mean, yeah, I am treading water. And so, so I see Alegre now. She's already been to the monastery, right? So she's made this discovery, and I see her doing her thing, and really rocking it, like stay at home, work from home mom, and homeschooling her kid on top of, maintaining her businesses and really rocking it and they're doing family vacations, and they really, so like all these things that I'm thinking, like, how does she do it? How does she have the time to do the stuff that she wants to do and handle all the rest? So I was like, Alegre, how do you do it, girl? And she was so generous. Like she first was like, well, this is the planner I use. And this, started pointing me in that direction. And then like in early March 2020, I opened up that planner. I'm like, okay, now this is it. I'm going to do it now. And we all know what happened in mid-March, right? And so a few months into our lockdown, Alegre checked in with me and was like, hey, how you doing with that planner? I was like, girl, like I started that planner, but everything's on the wayside, And so she's like, what do you say we work on it together, And through those conversations and me, like me picking her brain, this is how our business BYWD, Beyond Your Wildest Dreams, was born. Because as we're going through it, she's like, this is how I worked it. And we've been discovering, like, she and I are different people, and so taking the framework that Alegre developed and then modifying it in some ways for myself. And that's one of the things that we very much encourage our students to do, is like make it so that it works for you, so that you work it, so that it doesn't become something like, I can't do it, and throw it away. Anyway, all of that to say, this is how BYWD was born, out of these, like, just two friends, like a friend helping a friend, and then as I'm seeing it work and as I'm seeing how it goes, we were just like, can't keep this to ourselves, Alegre was like, let's do this. Let's do it. Let's bring it to the people. Let's bring it, and it is, of course, geared towards moms and caregivers because we're in a certain season of our lives, but the principles around it would work for anyone, honestly.
Right. Like, we say our mission is to empower moms and caregivers to prioritize themselves, save time, and accomplish their goals. But for anyone who's a student of productivity, we're basically productivity, habit formation, and life design, but always through the lens of being a caregiver, because when you have other people who have a claim on your time, your day looks very different.
Yes. That is certainly, like, that's actually what I found very interesting when I was trying to go over your business. And I was telling to myself, this is very, very useful, not just for mothers, but for other people who just really want to, make a concrete plan and focus on what they want to accomplish in life. So speaking of accomplishments, so far, how has it been for your business? Like, has there been a particular experience that, often you would share this experience with your own clients and with your own students that, based on this experience, we know that what we're doing is actually very useful and something that you can do for yourself, so you should be doing it. Is there a particular experience or?
Well, we think of it, okay, so in terms of, do you mean feedback from students?
Yes. And as well as from your own experience, like, was there ever a particular instance in your own life where you were like, hey, this actually works, and this is like the bread and butter of what we're teaching them?
Oh yeah. I mean, all the time, all the time, because the stuff that we talk about is really about daily life, right? We're not talking about these. We do tell you how to set about your goals, your big life goals, but we then back it into, okay, so let's take those big life goals, which should be aligned with your values, right? And then let's break that down into 10-year goals, and then 5-year goals, and then 1-year goals, and then what can you do every day that moves that 1-year goal forward? And so we're really focused on the everyday, even though we have the I going forward. But the thing for me that I feel like has been the thing that really just pops up again and again is that for me, true happiness comes when my daily activities are aligned with my values. And that sounds so lofty, but I discover it in the craziest ways. Like, so one of my values is conservation of capital, human, and natural resources, right? And so my father had passed away, and I was going through the garage, and there was a chest, the kind of thing that you sort nails and screws in, and it had never been used. And I said, well, I got a lot of nails and screws at home, so might as well sort them. And, because again, this is me, like it might be easier to just run out and grab a screw at the hardware store, but that's not aligned with my values. I was like, this is aligned with my values. So I put on an audiobook I liked. I sat down one evening, and for 2 hours, I was sorting screws, and I was having so much fun. I was like, yes, and this one goes there, and this one goes there. It was like a puzzle.
Very satisfying.
And I was like, I'm having fun because it's aligned with my values. Like, it seems so mundane. Like, I'm going to spend the night sorting screws. I literally was like smiling as I was doing it. And the thing is that I did this now about a year and a half ago. I have saved myself at least 25 trips to the hardware store. And I'm a member of my local Buy Nothing group. I don't know if you know what that is, but I have put my screw drawer on the Buy Nothing group as a resource for people. And people have said, do you have 2 of these? I'm like, yes, I do. Come on over.
Grab a screw.
Grab a screw.
Yeah. Or 2.
It has continued to be the gift that gives. Every time I use it, I'm like, ding, that is living my values. And so living your values.
Like a silly story. Okay, she sorted some screws, but it's it illustrates obviously this idea of living your values. And that's probably the thing that, when I told my story about, being underwater, I was just taking life as it was coming to me. It was like, put out this fire, put out that fire. Oh my goodness, what's happening? I was continuously backburnering my goals for myself. And so just this idea of like, I would say yes to all the invitations, and this is the other thing that was what was born out of the lockdown was, wow, life got really small and we all suddenly are home. And I realized, oh, wow, I don't have to put 1,000 miles on the car every week for my kids and for me to live a fulfilled life. Just because we've gotten 3 invitations on a Saturday doesn't mean I have to say yes to everything, and this idea of, it was like forced FOMO, right? I mean, everybody was missing out. But in that time, it helped me gain perspective. And then this is, of course, when we developed bywd in that time. And so took the time to sit down and really tease out what my values were. Like if somebody asked me, like, what are your values? I probably would have been able to rattle off 3 or 4, off the top, but to really sit and think, what are they? Are these values something that I feel like I should have? Is this somebody else's idea of a value? And when you get down to like what your actual values are, then this helps with your making decisions about those things. So you get 3 or 4 invitations for something, and you can really easily sit with, oh, that one is aligned with my values. This one, not so much. And really, it feels okay to say no to things, whereas before it really felt like I was missing out, right? So it helps with that prioritization. You spend your time more wisely. You have big smile on your face because you're sorting screws instead of, I don't know,
instead of out at a bar.
Out at a bar, yeah. So through that, we developed, BYWD, we've developed several different ways for people to get their teeth into the philosophy that we're talking about here. We've got books, we've got our workshop, we've got a little mini course, we've got a 2-day course, and the feedback from our students has been like, I mean, when we just did our beta course initially, I couldn't believe that, we were like, oh, this is so nice that people are enjoying it, right? We thought, and then we said, we want some, legit feedback. Please tell us how we can make this better. Please tell us what you got out of it. And the feedback was, this was life-changing. These are concepts I've always wanted to, I've always, I have never really been able to like grasp. We break them down into like easy, manageable steps. And, one of the things that I think is important, and one of the things that really has become a buzzword lately is this idea of self-care. And we talk about breaking down self-care into like it being prioritizing yourself is not just like a luxury, it's a necessity. And Alegre likes to say self-care is healthcare. And I feel like that is such a huge concept that taking it out of the realm of like spa days and mani-pedis, which is great, but to really put it in a place where it's like Alegre say, a daily activity.
Right. Like drinking your water, taking your supplements. And so you might even be surprised what I have in my morning ritual, right? So we have a book, Rock Your Morning, 3 Simple Steps to Take Control of Your Morning. And it's all about your morning ritual, right? Because we say take control of your morning because as a mom, it can be easy to feel like your morning is a train coming at you full force and you're like tied to the tracks, like, oh my God, what do I do? But your morning can be a moment of calm in your day if you plan it and set expectations. And, depending on what time your kids get up, get up just a little bit earlier, just so you can have that moment of peace and remember what silence sounds like. And so one of the things in my morning ritual is to empty the dish rack, right? Because at the end of the night, there's some things that have to be hand washed. And for sanitary reasons, they should dry overnight. That's like a food safety thing, but I'm not going to go into that. And so the next morning, it's like my kitchen's all clean because I cleaned it the night before, except for the dish rack. And so one of the first things I do is empty that dish rack. It only has like 10 things in it, maybe 5 even. But like all of a sudden I'm just like, like it's like a little slice of heaven, my kitchen. And that just makes me feel good because when I didn't do that, my husband would come in and make something and then he'd put a dirty fork that he just washed into the dish rack. And I'd be like, no, you just contaminated the clean dishes, and I would get frustrated and then dishes would start piling up. So that's one of the ways I manage my self-care. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that my morning ritual keeps me sane, completely keeps me sane. So it's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I do agree with that because I too have like a specific morning ritual that I have to be able to finish at least, like give myself like 10-15 minutes just for myself. Add on like having a cup of coffee, but so I do understand where you're coming from, and I love that you have like a concrete plan that everyone can actually apply to them, to their own experiences. And speaking of, in terms of working with your students, has there ever been so far a proud moment for you working with a student? Has there ever
so
been
many?
Yeah,
there have been so many. I mean, we've had students change careers because of our course. They realized their career wasn't aligned with their values, and they're like, and I didn't even realize it's been bugging me all this time. And once they figured out their values, they were like, it was so clear, I should be doing this.
And the other, we just recently, anecdotally, one of our students let us know that she had one of our books on her Kindle, and her husband read it because the books we have are short reads, and they're like they're workbooks as well, because we're like, you really need to get into it, right? You just don't want to read about it. We want it. So he gets done with, I think it was it the 3, 2, 1 done that he read?
3, 2, 1 done.
Which is about like really getting your maximizing your to-do list, like minimizing it to maximize it essentially. And he finished reading it. He did not, he's like, have you read this book, girl? You got to read this book. I know it's on your Kindle, but and so she got back to us and she's like, I didn't ask him to read the book. He read it on his own, and it made a huge difference for him. So little anecdotes like that, but people just basically telling us that it's been life-changing for them, and that they've gained tremendous amount of clarity. And we find that what we've had to do, because we have this 2-day signature course called Harness the Power of Planning, which is 2 consecutive Saturdays, or we've done it a bunch of different ways, but right now it's a 2-day course. We found when we first were developing the course, we wanted to pack it full of all this information that we researched, because we big brain science nerds, and hear about these conventional things, and we're like, well, is that true? Is it true it takes 21 days to create a habit? With a little bit of research, you find out, no, it's not true. It's 63 at minimum average. Anyway, so this is why we went ahead and developed these 2 other books, and we have more coming actually, because there are these little things that coincide with the larger course, the 2-day course, which we really think of it more of like a life design course. This is the course that I had come to Alegre for, where I was like, because I like to joke too, because like I'm very good at planning in one area, like really good at like party planning or specific summits or events and that kind of thing. But when it's that long-term thing, that open-ended thing that only really involves me, doesn't involve the family, I was just not, going ahead and prioritizing that. So we found other students as well were saying the same thing, that they're now finally these goals that they've had for years. And sometimes, like Alegre kind of mentioned, these goals you've had for years, when you really sit down and take a look at it, suddenly you're like, oh, this has shifted. It's not that important for me to do, be a world-class surfer. I don't know, whatever it was that they had held on to for so long. And now that opens up space for something new to show up and something they're really interested in, like one of our students who switched her careers.
Yeah. And actually going back to an earlier question where you said, did you ever have a realization based on your course? And, for years, people told me you should write a cookbook. And because, I'm teaching cooking classes, I've developed a gourmet food product. You should write a cookbook. Like that seems to make so much sense. But the funny thing was I actually closed the food business because 1, I couldn't find anyone who would make it for me the way I made it, but that's another story. But 2, I realized that I didn't want to spend 10 plus hours in a windowless room with a hairnet. Like that was not aligned with my values. But when it came to the cookbook, because the cookbook, it was about like 70% fulfilling, right? Like I was like, I like it, but it doesn't feel 100% right. And when Natascha and I started talking about bywd, it was like, bing, 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 like 100% right, 100% right. And then, we come out with 2 books in like less than, 16 months. Our 3rd book's coming out in June. Our 4th book will be out in August. I could have written a cookbook. I clearly just didn't want to. And now I realize it's because that wasn't the legacy I wanted to have. That wasn't the kind, I'm like, I wanted to do something that was going to help people in different ways. And as a mom, the most challenging part of my life, I was like, there's lots of other moms out there who need this. And Natascha and I have been recently reading a lot of literature for women of a certain age and for moms. And it feels like just like the right time. Like this is like 3rd wave feminism. It's like 2nd wave feminism was kind of like treat us like men and then we'll be happy. And 3rd wave feminism is like, no, value us for being women, then we'll be happy. And that's why this is important for women, no matter what age you are, because the fact that we live longer means that you're probably, even if you don't become a mom, you're going to be a caregiver at some point.
Yes.
It's just reality. So arm yourself with these tools now.
And prioritize yourself. That is really, really.
Yes, that I absolutely agree with what you guys said. And mentioning and going back to the word legacy, have you 2 been able to experience having people who have been a legacy to you, like has inspired you? I'm sure your families are such an inspiration to yourselves, and you 2 have surely been an inspiration to your students, but has there ever been people that have been your direct mentors or directly helped you become the person and the women that you are today?
Yes, so many. And some of them, I mean, yes, definitely personally, but some of them also people I don't know personally. Like I have a great aunt that died before I was born, but she was traveling the world by steamer boat, in the 1930s, a single Asian woman just traveling solo. Like I wish I knew her. So, and then, like my father is a huge inspiration to me. Ben Franklin, Ben Franklin, when he was 20, he looked at himself and he said, I don't like who I am. And he came up with a program of figuring out his values. And then he ranked himself, how he was living his values. Like, to be that honest with yourself, to say, I don't like who I am, but also to be so confident that you could change who you were. Like, that's what we want people to go away with. You know, if you know anything about brain plasticity or growth mindset, then you know that you can always change who you are. You are in total control. It's never too late. And take a page out of Ben Franklin, no slouch, right? He didn't like who he was. So we can all do it.
Yeah, and I've had my personal mentor in my other business, my other entrepreneurial business. I'm a vocal coach, and I was personally mentored by my mentor. and what she really helped me, and when I found her as a teacher, initially a teacher, and then later on as an apprentice of hers, what she did was demystify singing. Whereas before, so what I took away from, you know, how it's very, very specific to that niche, obviously, but what the takeaway there is, you know, she really took a look at one's anatomy and broke it down in such a way that students could understand it and understand the function. Because prior to that, it was just like, I don't know, I open my mouth and sound comes out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All the coaches I'd had before that are teachers before would talk to you about like very esoteric kind of like, think of a string and a butterfly flying above your head, like things that had nothing to do with the mechanics of singing. And my first lesson with her was, okay, let's talk about, there was no singing in the first lesson. And it was like, let's break down the anatomy of your instrument and how it relates to singing, and in such a way that it was understandable. And so that idea of let's break it down so it's manageable, I feel like is a very, you know, and it was, I mean, it was mind blowing for me, changed everything for me, changed the way that I sang, the way that I thought about it, and has helped me continue to like have a voice, you know, many decades later that I can still rely on, where people often say, oh, my voice changes over time. And yes, it can. But regardless, that same idea, taking it and applying it here. And this is how Alegre also approached it. And that's why I was like, oh, yes, this makes sense to me. And I know I do well with, let's break it down, instead of this like, oh, I'm not a good planner, or, you know, I'm good at parties, but I don't know how to plan my life. Well, it had never been really broken down. And so that really spoke to me when Alegre was like, let's break it down to a daily activity. Let's break this down into, and that helps me. That helps me understand it. And just like learning that about singing and then teaching that helped me become a better singer. This too, also, going ahead and breaking it down helped me become a better planner, and then of course teaching it, and it helps you understand these things from multifacets. So she was always a huge inspiration to me, and that direct mentor. And I personally am inspired by Lady Gaga a ton. Like, you may think like, well, she's Lady Gaga, so like whatever, but she has reinvented herself so many different ways. And I saw this interview with her once where she woke up to what she was valuing in this interview, where she suddenly said, you know, you think like, well, she's Lady Gaga, of course she can say no to whoever, but you don't understand, like the pressure that you have to say yes to everything on that level is 10 million times bigger than I could ever understand. You know, I'm like, oh, well, she's Lady Gaga, of course she can. But she just pivoted from like, no, I'm not doing that interview. No, I'm not going to endorse that product. No, I'm not going to, this is not aligned with my values, right? And so I saw this interview and I was like, Lady Gaga says no to things, you know, and how empowering that was. And, you know, she didn't like where things were going with her career, and she pivoted and went to it, you know, released a jazz album. She got on stage and sang from musical theater. Like, you think about where she was with like the meat dress.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the Tony Bennett.
Yeah, and then the jazz album with Tony Bennett, and then she goes on stage and sings from, you know, Sound of Music, and it's wildly different. You would think, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all of my fans if I pivot that hard, and she didn't, and she doesn't, and she's just so authentically herself, and I just admire her for that. And just like there's very little fear, and she knows who she is, and she kind of don't give a beep, you know. I'm inspired by her a lot.
Well, that's great. You know, people who inspired you, great mentors that have helped you. And so you two, as well as mentors, could you leave us with maybe a very practical tip that you could share with our audience? And so when they get to see and watch us and hear us, they'd be able to say, oh, these ladies know what they're talking about. This is something that I can do now, and that will help propel me to do things a lot better, especially with my self-care? Is there a practical way
absolutely
for them to begin? Could you share very practical, easy to follow tips that they can do like right now?
Yeah, so we are super into brain science, right? And there is something called a keystone habit. And keystone habits are defined as habits that have surprising cascade effects in other areas of your life besides the direct benefit that you get from doing the thing, right? So like, obviously, when you take a supplement, you're helping your body with that supplement, but maybe it has all these other benefits, right? So we tell people who are like, great, a morning ritual sounds great, but I just don't know where to start. Well, the science would all point to make your bed. Make your bed. There is so much scientific research on the value of making your bed and how it's a keystone habit. And the thing is like, of course, it's going to make your room look neater, right? But when you take into account, like, at least for me, like my bed has always been like 40% of my bedroom, like in every bedroom I've ever been in. Like if 40% of your room is messy, it's messy. It just is, right? So there's that. But two, it gives you a sense of accomplishment that, so Natascha and I are both educators, right? So she's a vocal coach. I'm a public speaking coach. In education, they talk about starting out with a little win just to raise your student self-confidence.
Yes.
You're raising your own self-confidence by having that little win. You're also, one of the things, there's so many things about making a bed, but one of the things I thought was most surprising is that making your bed actually helps you get better sleep at night, because the process of unmaking your bed is a signal to the brain like, oh, now it's going to be quiet time and I'm powering down.
Yeah, and if you're already a bed maker and already benefiting from that, good for you. Just suggest that you find one small thing that you can incorporate into your morning that you've been wanting to, whether it's journaling, meditating. For me right now, it's stretching. I want to become more flexible. And you know how long I stretch in the morning as part of my morning routine? 1 minute. That's it. 1 minute. That can start to make a difference for you. Just going ahead. So if you're already if you're not making your bed, make your bed. If you're already a bed maker, find one thing and do it for 1 minute. You have 1 minute in the morning. You have 1 minute. I promise you, you have 1 minute. Right? And if you don't have 1 minute, then we got to back it up and we got to take a look at some other stuff. Have a minute. So let's find that one thing that's good. And that 1 minute is me being present to my body, doing something for me. Right? So that signals to me like, hey, this little bit of self-care, you're worth enough to take care of yourself in this way.
Yeah. And if you're the person who needs the information to back up the 1 minute thing, that's called the Kaizen way. Mm-hmm. So Natascha and I talk about, the different personality types and how different people take in information. And, I have a rebel tendency. So I'm like, show me the proof.
Yeah.
Kaizen way.
Yeah, but that's absolutely like, that's our nature, I think. You want to see the proof first before everything else, right? So ladies, thank you so much for joining us in today's show. Now, guys, if you are listening and watching us today, these ladies have, of course, somewhere you can look into and find them. I will leave all of those links that you can contact Alegre and Natascha at, and I will leave those in the description below. Again, ladies, thank you so much for joining us in today's BetterU Podcast. And as always, let me remind you, everyone, to never give up on your movement journey, because it's never too late to move. Bye-bye.